They sat me with the waiters, not metaphorically, not as in, they ignored me so I felt like staff. No. At my own engagement party, my chair was literally pressed up against a service station, facing the swinging kitchen doors. On my right, there was a stack of white plates, still damp from the dishwasher. On my left, half hidden by a wooden folding screen, there was a silver trash bin that tried and failed to contain the smell of food scraps and bleach. Every time the doors flapped open, a wave of cold air and kitchen noise washed over me. Pots clanged. Someone shouted for more glasses. The smell of butter and garlic and burned oil rolled through, along with brief flashes of the real party. I could see Emma's family in the center of the ballroom under glittering crystal chandeliers, their laughter rising above the string quartet's soft background music. They were framed by an ice sculpture in the shape of a giant letter M for Marshall, and a champagne tower that caught the lights like liquid gold. From my little exile beside the kitchen, I watched Emma's mother get to her feet, raise a slender hand, and tap her glass with a fork until the metallic chime cut through the music. "To family," she said, her voice smooth and practiced, loud enough to float to the far corners of the ballroom. People around her lifted their glasses, smiling. My table, on the other hand, consisted of 3 waiters on a short break and a busboy hunched over his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. They glanced at each other, then at me, unsure if they should pretend not to hear. "To our legacy," she continued, turning toward the massive Marshall logo projected on the wall behind the head table. More murmurs of appreciation. A few people actually clapped. Her husband, Richard, smirked proudly, like she'd just nailed a rehearsed line. Emma sat between them in an ivory dress that made her look almost bridal, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. From where I sat, I could see the way her fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt under the tablecloth. Her mother wasn't finished. She tilted her glass in my general direction, the movement casual, almost lazy, as if she were pointing toward a decoration rather than a person. "And to charity," she added, lips curving into the smallest smirk. "We all do our part, don't we?" The table around her laughed. Not a huge explosion of laughter, more like a polite ripple, but I heard the edge in it, the little sting, the joke that wasn't really a joke. A few people glanced toward the back of the room where I sat. One man raised an eyebrow as if seeing me for the first time. Like, "Oh, right. The fiancé." The busboy next to me slowly put his phone down. One of the waiters stole a look at my face and then dropped his gaze again, as if it were dangerous to stare at someone being publicly humiliated. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, I was grateful for the distraction. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen, just to have something to focus on that wasn't their carefully rehearsed cruelty. The subject line hit me like a physical blow. Confirmation. Majority ownership transfer. Marshall Holdings Incorporated. Marshall Holdings, their family company, the empire that paid for the chandeliers, the ballroom, the ice sculpture, the matching gold cufflinks on Richard's shirt, the company whose logo was glowing like a holy symbol behind them. I stared at the email for a long second, my heart beating in my ears. The text blurred slightly as the weight of it settled on me. We had been working on this transfer for months. Negotiations, silent buys, complicated paperwork through Cole Capital, and its layers of shell companies. I knew this email was coming. I knew it would land today. I had even chosen the timing, but somehow, seeing it while I was literally seated next to the trash can at my own engagement party made it feel different. Sharper. Darker. I lifted my eyes. At the head table, Richard was laughing at something Chase, Emma's older brother, had just whispered in his ear. Chase tossed his head back, the picture of effortless confidence. He was wearing a tux that probably cost more than my entire first apartment. His hair was slicked back with the precise messiness of someone who had a stylist. They looked so comfortable, so sure that they owned the room, the night, the narrative, the future. They had no idea that, as of approximately 10 minutes ago, I owned 62% of the company they worshipped like a god, and I still sat with the waiters. A server rushed past me, her tray loaded with champagne flutes. One glass tipped, and a cold splash of liquid hit my shoulder and sleeve. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she whispered, eyes going wide. It's okay, I said automatically. My voice sounded calm, but my fingers were trembling slightly as I dabbed at the spot with a napkin. She hesitated, like she wanted to say something else, then slipped back through the swinging doors. The wood flapped, and another wave of clinking plates and sizzling food rushed out before the door shut again. I listened to the music, the clatter of cutlery, the low murmur of polished conversations full of numbers and names and plans. I listened to my own breathing, too loud in my ears. I had come to this party planning to keep quiet. I had told myself that I didn't owe these people anything, that I didn't need to prove anything to them, that I could sit through a few hours of barbed comments and thinly veiled insults for Emma's sake, and then quietly reshape the company from the boardroom later. But there is a line that's hard to see until you've crossed it. A point where silence stops being strategic and starts feeling like self-betrayal. The chair beneath me dug into my back. The trash bin smell was a constant reminder of where they thought I belonged. Another notification lit up my phone. A follow-up email from the bank with documents attached, confirming the breakdown of my voting rights and control percentages. I watched my own name next to the words majority owner, and something in me clicked. Chase walked up to the microphone in the center of the room, tapping it twice. The speakers buzzed softly. "Everybody," he boomed. "If I can have your attention for a moment." The string quartet faded out. Conversations quieted. A spotlight snapped on and bathed him in bright white light. He stood in it, like he'd been born there. The rest of the ballroom dimmed. My corner was left in shadow, a strange half-light where the glow from the kitchen and the glimmer from the chandeliers didn't quite reach. "This is a really special night for our baby girl," he said, gesturing toward Emma with a grand sweep of his arm. "She has always had, let's say, unconventional taste." The polite chuckles returned on cue. She brought home stray cats, broken toys, the weirdest friends. He continued, smiling as if this were adorable instead of vaguely insulting. "And we loved her for it. But tonight, she has truly outdone herself." The laughter grew a little louder now. A few guests were already looking in my direction, anticipation on their faces. They knew where this was going. "She went out and found herself a real-life underdog," Chase said. "A guy with, what did you say, Mom? Potential?" Her mother raised her glass again and repeated the word, letting it roll off her tongue slowly, almost tenderly. "Potential," she said, like she was describing a charity case. The word shattered something small and hidden in my chest. It wasn't the worst thing they'd said or implied. It wasn't even particularly creative, but it carried every unspoken thought they'd had about me since the day I met them. Potential, as in, not enough yet. Potential, as in, maybe one day you'll be worthy of us, but not today. Potential, as in, you are currently beneath us, and we are being generous by pretending you could possibly climb to our level. The table around them laughed again. Not the full, rich laughter they reserved for their own jokes, but the brittle, controlled, kind people use when they're following social cues. My table stayed quiet. One of the waiters shifted in his seat. The busboy stared at the white tablecloth like it held the answer to a question he didn't dare ask. Chase lifted his champagne flute. "Let's all welcome Nate," he said, turning to face the crowd with theatrical enthusiasm. "The man who reminds us it's important to give back." There was applause, light, insincere, polite. It washed over me and left me feeling cold. I looked down at my phone again. The email with the confirmation sat there, solid and undeniable. For months, I had played the long game. I had watched this family from the inside and the outside at the same time. I had attended board meetings as a quiet presence, slipping in and out of shareholder calls while Richard thundered about discipline and loyalty and blood. I had listened to overheard comments at their townhouse, the words they never thought would reach me. "Emma is slumming it. He'll get tired of feeling out of place. She'll come to her senses. This phase will pass," always with the same assumption humming underneath, that they were up here and I was down there, that everything in the world could be separated into those two categories, that anyone who wasn't born with their last name and their money could be sorted neatly into staff, service providers, entertainment, or charity. They never bothered to ask about my past, my work, my company, my investments. When I said, "I work in investments," they heard, I handle spreadsheets for someone more important. They never connected Nathan Cole with Cole Capital. They never looked closely enough at the new name on the list of shareholders quietly climbing, quarter after quarter, up the ladder of control. I slid my phone back into my pocket. My heart was hammering. My hands were still damp from the champagne stain, but a different kind of heat was rising in me now. The kind that comes when humiliation transforms into clarity. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped across the floor with a loud, unpleasant sound that made several people turn around. That sound felt like a starting gun going off. I stood up. For a second, I just stood there, feeling the weight of the room tilt toward me. Every step I took from that corner to the center would change everything. Not just for me, not just for them. For every person whose life their decisions touched. I took a breath and started walking. I passed the tables where their friends and business partners sat with their perfectly polished spouses, their designer dresses, their carefully measured expressions. As I moved between them, I caught flashes of curiosity, confusion, irritation. Who is he? Why is he leaving his seat? Is he supposed to be up here? No one asked out loud. They just watched. On the stage, Chase paused, microphone halfway to his mouth, eyes narrowing as he saw me approaching. Emma turned in her chair. Her eyes met mine, wide and fearful and pleading all at once. A tiny shake of her head said, "Don't do this." Or maybe it said, "Please don't make it worse." Or maybe it said, "I'm scared of what happens if you speak." I wondered as I moved closer, if there had been a moment in the last year where she could have stood between us and said, "Enough." A moment where she could have refused to let them seat me near the kitchen. A moment where she could have drawn a line. Maybe she thought she was doing that in small ways. Arguing with her mother by the bar. Rolling her eyes when her father made some cutting remark. Squeezing my hand under the table. But sometimes, small resistance just makes the cage invisible. I reached the front of the room. I stepped into the edge of the spotlight. It painted part of my face in white and left the rest in shadow. Chase lowered the microphone slightly. "Nate," he said, with a tight smile. "Buddy, the staff area is back there. You're kind of blocking." "Funny," I said quietly, my voice carrying through the speakers because a technician near the wall had reflexively nudged a fader up when he saw someone near the mic. "Because, as of 15 minutes ago, I own the staff entrance." That got their attention. The room, which had been full of rustling and whispering and the soft clink of cutlery, seemed to hold its breath. A few people shifted. Someone coughed. The band stopped moving entirely, bowstrings hovering above instruments. I turned my head slowly toward the massive Marshall Holdings logo glowing on the screens behind the head table. The bright white M looked like it was watching us. "And the logo," I continued, "and around 62% of everything under that name." Chase blinked, then laughed. It came out too loud and too forced. "Okay," he said. That's a good one. You've been hanging around our PR team too much, man. Is this a bit? Are we doing some kind of humble origin speech? Because if we are, you're stepping all over my timing." He looked around for backup, expecting the room to join him in the joke. A few people gave weak, uncertain laughs. They were still waiting to be told how to react. I didn't look away from Richard. He was no longer smirking. His face had gone bone white. His lips were pressed into a thin line. I saw, in real time, the flicker of dawning realization move across his features. He had read board reports. He had seen the name Cole Capital on the shareholder list, increasing its stake quarter after quarter. He had heard his advisors mention the new majority. He had shrugged it off, assuming it was some Midwestern pension fund or a faceless institutional concern that could be placated. He was replaying those meetings now, connecting dots he had never bothered to connect before. "Cole Capital," he said slowly. I inclined my head. "Now you're using my name correctly." A murmur ran through the front tables. People glanced at each other. Someone whispered, "That's him?" under their breath. Richard searched my face like it was a puzzle he should have solved earlier. "I've seen that name," he said, almost to himself. "On the registry, on the filings. I took my phone out again and held it up. The glow from the screen lit my hand. "This is the confirmation email from the bank," I said. "We completed the transfer this evening." Cole Capital now holds 62% of Marshall Holdings' voting shares. I asked them to file at 8 p.m. It's public record now. You can have your lawyers check if you like. They'll find exactly what I'm saying. Silence. Real silence. Not the heavy-laden pause before a punchline. Not the respectful hush while someone important speaks. A vacuum, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Eyes were on me now. Not with the lazy appraisal they'd given me earlier, but with something else. Calculation. Fear. Fascination. Her mother was the first to move. She shot to her feet so quickly that her chair tipped over and crashed onto the marble floor behind her. The sound harsh and jarring. "You tricked us," she hissed. Her voice shook with rage. "You came into our home under false pretenses. You used my daughter to get to us. I met your daughter in a broken elevator," I said, cutting in, my voice steady. "I didn't even know your stock symbol when I asked her out for coffee." Emma flinched as if the words themselves hurt. "I built my own company," I went on. "I sold it. I invested. I made choices you never bothered to ask about. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw what you wanted to see." Her mother's lip curled. "You're a boy from nowhere," she spat, "with some money and a chip on your shoulder. You think you can buy your way into a legacy like ours? You think that holding a few pieces of paper makes you one of us?" I smiled slightly. It felt cold. "I don't want to be one of you," I said. "That's the point." Richard stepped forward, the veins in his neck standing out. "You misrepresented yourself," he said. "You lied by omission. You deliberately concealed the extent of your involvement in my company. That is grounds for legal action. I will sue you for fraud. I will—" "Richard," I said quietly, "if you sue me, discovery will be brutal. Are you sure you want every document, every email, every off-the-record conversation about the supply chain issues and the benefits cuts and the hush payments to hit daylight?" Color drained further from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might actually collapse. I took a breath and shifted my weight, anchoring myself. "Let's skip the part where you pretend you still have leverage," I said. "We both know where it lies now." I looked around the room slowly, letting my gaze travel over the faces watching me. Some were pale, some were flushed. A few had that strange look people get when they are witnessing something they will tell stories about for years, even if they play down their own excitement later. "I want to be very clear about a few things," I said. The microphone picked up my voice cleanly. The words came out calm, almost conversational. "I did not do this because I wanted to humiliate you for sport. I didn't set out to engineer some kind of dramatic reveal. At my engagement party, I had actually planned to keep my involvement quiet for another quarter. Let the numbers speak first." I let my eyes flick toward the corner where my old table sat, half in shadow. "But then you sat me with the waiters," I said. "At my own engagement party." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. "And you lifted your glass," I continued, looking back at her mother, "and toasted to charity like I was one of your pet projects. You used my existence as proof of your generosity." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "What you didn't know," I said softly, "was that while you were deciding I belonged near the kitchen, your company was being held up by men and women who sit at tables just like that. In every city you operate in. People who work double shifts. People who clean up the mess after your parties. People who remember what it's like to count coins for gas." I thought of my father, coming home after 14-hour shifts with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his bones, collapsing into a chair in our small kitchen, closing his eyes for just a second, and waking up an hour later with a stiff neck and a cold dinner. He never had a healthcare plan that covered the illness that took him. He never had a pension. He never had a CEO look him in the eye and say, "We see you." I swallowed and brought my focus back to the present. "You talk a lot about legacy," I said to Richard. "At that first dinner you told me, blood matters. That's what keeps this from crumbling. You tapped your chest and said your name meant something. You told your daughter she couldn't dilute it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You thought legacy was about keeping power in the family," I said, passing it down like a crown, making sure no one from the outside ever climbed too high. I let the next words land slowly. "But legacy is also about the damage you leave behind," I said. The people you step on. The lives you decide are disposable. So your quarterly report looks prettier. I turned slightly, angling my body so I could see the staff from where they stood near the walls, holding trays and trying very hard not to be noticed. Their faces were mostly blank, but their eyes were sharp. I own the majority of your company now, I said. That gives me the power to make changes. I'm going to use it. I raised my hand and counted off on my fingers. First, I said, we're going to restore the healthcare and pension benefits you slashed 2 years ago to fund that stock buyback. The one you bragged about in your shareholder letter as a decisive move in uncertain times. The one that left a lot of your longtime employees suddenly unsure how they were going to pay for medicine. Someone near the front shifted uncomfortably. Second, I continued, we're going to review executive compensation. Right now, you pay some people ridiculous salaries to sit in glass offices and sign documents other people wrote, while the people who actually keep your production lines running barely make enough to cover rent. That's going to change, especially for roles that are essentially vanity titles. Chase's hands clenched at his sides. His face went blotchy with anger. You can't do that to me, he blurted. I've worked hard for what? I asked, turning to look at him. For a title your father carved out for you on a flowchart. For showing up to meetings late and scrolling through your phone while other people present real work. If you want to stay, you can reapply for a role you actually qualify for. Otherwise, you're done. A gasp. Somewhere in the back. Third, I said, shifting my attention back to the room at large. We're going to set up an independent ethics committee with actual teeth. Not the kind of window dressing operation you currently have that exists to rubber stamp whatever you already decided to do. Real oversight. Real consequences. Her mother laughed then. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound. You're tearing down everything we built, she snapped. Years. Decades. Our name is on skyscrapers. Your name is on a lot of things, I agreed, including some internal memos you really don't want the press to see. I'm not tearing everything down. I'm rebuilding the parts that keep the whole structure from rotting. I paused, then added, and I'm not doing it alone. I turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, I said. I'll be transferring 10% of my voting shares into an employee trust. That trust will be structured to give the lowest paid workers in the company a meaningful voice. They will elect representatives. Those representatives will sit in certain meetings. They will see things you never let them see before, and they will have power to push back when a decision threatens their ability to live, not just your ability to buy another vacation home. The room buzzed. Some of the faces near the front looked furious. Others looked intrigued. A few, especially near the edge where the staff stood, looked like they couldn't decide whether to believe what they were hearing or brace for it to be snatched away. Richard stared at me like I was speaking another language. You cannot just walk in here, he said, each word bitten off, and rewrite decades of policy because you feel slighted at a party. I let out a slow breath. This isn't about a party, I said. This is about a pattern. Tonight just made it impossible to pretend I hadn't seen it. I looked at Emma. For a moment, everything else blurred. The room, the lights, the murmurs. It was just her and me. Like those 45 minutes in the broken elevator where we'd first met. Her eyes were wet. Her makeup had started to smudge slightly at the corners. Nate, she whispered. Her voice shook. Why didn't you tell me? It was the second time she asked that question. I knew it wouldn't be the last time she thought it. I wanted to know if you saw me, I said quietly. Or if you only saw what I could do for you. For them. For this. I gestured toward the logo. The chandeliers. The ice sculpture slowly dripping onto the table beneath it. I did see you, she said, her voice snapping, a note of desperation creeping in. I loved you. I still. Her mother put a hand on her arm, fingers digging in. Emma, she hissed. Do not embarrass us further. The spell broke. The old gravity reasserted itself. I felt something inside me cool, harden. The part of me that had once imagined a life where Emma and I stood together against this was still there, but it was surrounded now by the memory of all the small moments where she'd chosen not to rock the boat. Maybe you did love me, I said softly. Maybe you still do, but love without action is just sentiment. and sentiment doesn't change anything in rooms like this. She looked like she wanted to argue. She looked like she wanted to say she had tried, that she had fought. Maybe she had, but sometimes trying isn't enough when the cost of change is high. And her parents had raised her to see their world as the only one worth protecting. I took a small step back, away from the head table, away from the spotlight's harsh cone. This is the part where I'm supposed to beg for acceptance, I said, where I promise to keep the peace, to play nice, to act like the majority owner who will quietly let the old king keep his throne, as long as he doesn't bother me too much. Asked. Richard opened his mouth, hope flickering briefly in his eyes. I'm not that man, I said. His hope died. You will step down as CEO, I continued, publicly, with whatever face-saving narrative your PR team can craft. Health reasons, a desire to spend more time with family, a new philanthropic focus. I don't care. But you're done making day-to-day decisions. His mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. And if I refuse, he finally asked, then we call another shareholder meeting, I said. And I bring data and testimonies and a list of the cost of your decisions to the people in this company who don't sit at this table. The board will side with me. They like power. They like profit. But they also like survival. They know which way the wind is blowing. He swayed slightly, as if the floor under him had shifted. Her mother looked at me like I was something she had scraped off her shoe. You have no class, she said coldly. No refinement. Whatever money you stumbled into doesn't change that. You will never be one of us. A strange, calm clarity settled over me. I am very aware I will never be one of you, I said. And after tonight, I am grateful for that. I slipped my hand into my pocket and closed my fingers around the ring box, feeling its solid little weight. I pulled it out slowly. Emma's eyes widened. No, she whispered. Please don't. I opened the box, took the ring out, and placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth in front of her. The diamond caught the light and flashed briefly, like an eye. You'll be fine, I said softly. You have them. You have this world. Their approval, their rules, their legacy. My voice shook for the first time. I can't build a life inside a house that's rotting from the foundation, I said. Not even for you. I straightened. The board will receive official notice of the changes tomorrow. You'll receive a calendar invite for the emergency meeting, I added, slipping briefly back into the clipped language of business. It was easier than letting the hurt bleed all over the floor. Then I turned away. I walked back through the ballroom, past tables where people suddenly found their plates very interesting, past guests who studied their glasses as if the bubbles held the secret to disappearing, past a couple of braver souls who looked at me with something like respect. I felt eyes on my back all the way to the edge of the room. At the door to the kitchen, I paused. The staff table was right there. The server who had spilled champagne on me earlier was standing now, her tray empty, her hands twisting in front of her. How long have you worked here? I asked her quietly. She blinked, surprised I was speaking to her at all, let alone with that calm tone. 3 years, she said. Almost 4. Why? Do you like it? I asked. She hesitated. I like the people I work with, she said carefully. I like the guests. Most of the time. The way we're talked to, sometimes, could be better. I nodded. That's going to change, I said. Not overnight, but soon. In the next few months, you're going to hear about an employee trust and some new faces in meetings. It's not a stunt. It's real. Use it. Speak up. Hold us accountable. Us? She repeated, incredulous. Us. I confirmed. If we do this right, this place doesn't belong to just one last name anymore. Her lips parted. A small smile flickered there, like she didn't quite dare let it fully form. Thank you, she whispered. The swinging kitchen door opened again, and a line of staff carried out plates for the main course. Behind me, in the ballroom, the music hadn't started again. The silence felt heavy, thick, full of ghosts. I stepped through the doorway and let the noise of the kitchen swallow me. The clatter, the shouted orders, the hiss of the grill, the smell of real work and real sweat felt strangely comforting. In the days that followed, The story of that night leaked in pieces. Someone recorded parts of my speech on their phone. Someone else passed along the details of my ownership to a friend at a financial blog. The internet did what it does best: fill the gaps with speculation and dramatization. Headlines appeared: engagement party shock, poor fiancé, revealed as majority owner of bride's family company. Anonymous investor Cole Capital, identified as Nate Cole, Marshall Dynasty, shaken as CEO steps down after surprise shareholder coup. The narrative painted me as everything from a romantic hero standing up against snobbish elites to a calculating mastermind who had orchestrated the whole thing as an act of revenge. The truth was more complicated, as it always is. Emma texted me once. I didn't need to see her name to know it was from her. The message preview alone made my chest tighten. I didn't know. I didn't see. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time. There was a version of me, somewhere, in the multiverse, who responded, who said, I know, who said, let's talk, who said, come with me, who said, we can build something new together, apart from them. But in this version, in this life, the weight of everything that had led us here was too much. The pattern was too clear. The cost of trying to drag someone out of a world they were still half in love with was too high. I deleted the message without replying, not out of spite, out of self-preservation. Over the next year, we did exactly what I said we would do. We restored benefits, starting with the people at the very bottom of the ladder. A factory worker in Ohio cried in a conference room when she realized her husband's medications would be covered again. A warehouse supervisor in Texas shook my hand so hard I almost lost feeling, thanking me over and over until I had to gently tell him it wasn't charity, it was justice. We went through executive roles one by one. Some people resigned quietly. Some stomped out, throwing thinly veiled threats over their shoulders. One or two surprised me by saying, it's about time, and offering to help build something better from the inside. We formed the ethics committee. The first time they blocked a deal, Richard would have shoved through without blinking. I sat in my office and stared at the email, feeling a strange mixture of pride and grief. It shouldn't have been radical to decide not to exploit a loophole that hurt people. But in their world, it was. We established the employee trust. In its first official meeting, a woman from one of the oldest production lines took a seat at a large table she'd never been invited to before. Her hands shook as she unfolded a piece of paper and read from notes she'd written the night before. She talked about the last round of layoffs, about how many years some of those workers had given the company, about what it felt like to be told, it's just business. When you're looking at rent, you can't pay. As she spoke, I watched some of the remaining executives shift in their chairs, some in discomfort, some in shame, some with sincere attention. When she finished, there was a silence in that room too, a different kind than the ballroom silence. This one felt like a seed being planted. There were days when I felt crushed by the weight of it all. Money and control were one thing. Changing the culture of a giant machine built on arrogance and fear was another. On those days, I would sometimes walk through the city and end up, without meaning to, near places that reminded me of where I'd started. The narrow street, where my father and I used to wait for the bus. The supermarket where we'd stand in the checkout line counting coins. The apartment building with peeling paint, where I'd spent late nights teaching myself code on a second-hand laptop while my parents slept. I'd think about that kid and about the night in the ballroom when he finally refused to stay at the table someone else had chosen for him. I'd think about legacy again. Richard's portrait still hung in the main lobby. I didn't have it taken down. Erasing him from the walls wouldn't erase the decisions he'd made or the echoes of his influence. History doesn't disappear just because you stop looking at it. But beneath that portrait, we installed a new plaque. It listed names most of the original board would never have recognized. Maintenance staff, line workers, drivers, receptionists, people who had been there since the early days, who had kept showing up even when the company forgot about them. I watched one of them, an older man with graying hair and a limp, trace his own name with a finger one afternoon. He looked both embarrassed and deeply, quietly moved. That felt more like legacy to me than any skyscraper with a last name on it. Sometimes, late at night when the building was mostly empty, and the city's noise was a distant hum behind glass. I would sit alone at the boardroom table, the same kind of table where men like Richard had once slammed their fists and declared edicts that rippled out into the lives of thousands. The surface was smooth under my palms. I would picture that ballroom again. The swinging doors, the trash bin, the service station, the way humiliation had burned hot in my chest, the way my chair had scraped against the floor when I finally stood up. People love the glamorous parts of these stories. The moment the controlling stake is revealed, the look on the faces of those who thought they owned everything, the twist. But the real turning point wasn't the email confirming the share transfer. It wasn't the gasps when I said I owned the company. It wasn't their faces going pale. It was that second when I decided I would no longer agree to the place they had assigned me. The second I decided that if they were going to insist on dividing the world into those who deserved to sit under the chandeliers and those who belonged by the kitchen doors, then I would rather burn down the categories than keep negotiating for a slightly better seat. They tried to seat me with the waiters like trash. Instead, they handed me the perfect vantage point to see exactly what their legacy actually was. Arrogance, entitlement, contempt, disguised as refinement. Charity that was really self-congratulation. Loyalty that only flowed upward. My legacy, if I get to have one, will be different, not because I'm noble, not because I'm immune to ego or anger, or the dark satisfaction of watching someone who once sneered at me choke on their own shock, but because I remember how it feels to be small, to be counted out, to be spoken about in the third person, as if you weren't in the room. I remember trash bins and broken elevators and nights staring at bank statements, wondering how the numbers would stretch. And I know this: no one gets to decide your worth but you. If you ever find yourself seated by the kitchen, your cheeks burning, your heart pounding, listening to people toast to their own greatness, while you pick at cold food and try to make yourself smaller, remember my story. Remember that somewhere out there is a version of you who stands up, chair scraping, hands shaking, and walks toward the center of the room. A version who looks the people who underestimated you in the eye and says, quietly and clearly, I do not accept the seat you have given me. Sometimes, the black sheep is not the one who ruins the family. Sometimes, he is the one who finally sees the family for what it is and chooses to build something better with the power they never thought he'd have. They sat me with the waiters. Now, when I sit at the head of any table, I remember that night, and I make damn sure there's no one in the room who feels like they've been pushed toward the trash.